everyone. So this is going to be a video explaining the 4 perceiving cognitive functions. So for those of you who don't know, there are 8 cognitive functions in total, and 4 of them are perceiving ones, which are ones that we basically use to take in the information and what we do with that information. And then the other 4 are called judging functions, where we use these functions to make our decisions in life and how we make those decisions. So the perceiving functions are either taken in by intuition or by sensing. And even with those two, there's 2 different types of intuition and there's 2 different types of sensing. And the judging styles, there's 2 different types of thinking and there's 2 different types of feeling. But one thing that you should know is that we use both thinking and feeling, and we use both intuition and sensing. It just all comes down to which one's more dominant in your function stack. And today I'm not really going to talk much about function stack. I'm going to dedicate that to another video, but I'm just going to talk briefly. I'm going to try not to go too deep, but I also want y'all to get the information. Y'all know how thorough I am with what I say. So hopefully you guys will be able to pay attention. And speaking of paying attention, we're going to start off with the perceiving functions that have the least bit of control with paying attention, and then we'll probably get to the ones which are more, capable of actually sitting through a video, however long this one is going to end up being. So the first cognitive function, perceiving function that I'm going to talk about is SE, also known, extroverted sensing, also known as SE. And SE is all about being completely in the moment. So types that use this as a strength are ESFPs, ESTPs, ISFPs, and ISTPs. Now, ESFPs have this as their dominant function or their driver in their mind. So for those of you who've probably seen the movie Inside Out, you can think of extroverted sensing as how joy was depicted. Like there was of course other characters in the girl's mind. I forgot the girl's name, but Joy was obviously the leader of anger and depression or whatever, sadness or whatever her name was. ESFPs and ESTPs have extroverted sensing as their dominant function. It's the thing they always live in. So they are just a tiny bit more natural and skilled at this than those who have it in the auxiliary function, like the ISFPs and the ISTPs, but they tend to still be like, it's just the difference between a driver and a co-pilot. They're both adults, but one is just always in driving. So for both of these types, or all 4 of these types, they tend to always be in the moment, and due to this, they catch everything. Like there's a joke saying something like, you basically can't scratch any private areas on you around an ESFP because they're like always just on them, like they're just looking around, and they'll just catch you. They'll catch you and they'll say, they won't. Well, actually, no. ESFPs, I think they will say something according to Tay, but ironically, ISFPs are known to be the ones that catch everything, but they don't say anything. And I can totally see this with Jamila. I usually compare her to a cat that just sits there and observes everything, but you have no idea what she's thinking. She doesn't say anything. It's like, oh, you address her about something later. It's like, oh no, I caught that. It's like, you weren't gonna say anything? Well, just how she is. But yeah, they are always in the moment. They catch everything, and they're completely in tune with their body. So think of people like Michael Jackson, Chris Brown, Justin Timberlake, Usher, people who are just so, Sierra, like all of these people are so in tune with their body, and they just move so fluidly. Like that doesn't mean that intuitives cannot dance, of course, but I just see a big pattern with SPs, even SPs in my life, like friends that I have, Priscilla, shout out to you, Miriam, a whole bunch of the SPs in my life. They're just really good at seizing the moment and taking complete advantage of it, and they're really good at performing. They tend to be like very good at singing. They have a very great knack for just picking up an instrument and learning how to play like easily. They're really good at cooking because they are so in tune with their senses. Like they're so completely sensual and in the moment that they just feel everything. They're in tune with the way their body works, their body breathes, all of that. Tay's a bodybuilder. Well, not really. He's a Olympic weightlifter. My bad, Tay. And he is just so good with being in tune with his body. He's also a singer. So is Jamila, and Jamila is now getting into like the dancing and everything as well. They tend to be psychic in the sense that they have a natural knack or even an intuition that is more for the outside world. So these tend to be the types that know like, oh, if I hit the ball this way, this is how it's gonna go. Oh, if the ball is hit like that, then it's probably gonna end up over here where I'm gonna catch it. They also tend to take things at face value a lot. This happens so much with me and Tay. Like I have a tendency to speak in metaphor a lot. And it's not something that I just sit there and think about, but it just, when I'm trying to explain something, y'all probably noticed this in my spontaneous speaking videos, I start to struggle. I'm like, ugh, okay, it's kind of like this. And Tay just likes to take things concretely. So if there's like, there was a specific conversation that me and him had where he said something like, closed mouths don't get fed. And then I was like, yeah, you're right. But if the mouth is always having to beg to be fed, or if the mouth, dang, I can't remember it at the moment. But I basically said something along the lines of, if what's being fed has a whole bunch of like salt on it, then maybe the mouth won't always be happy to take it or whatever. And Tay just took that completely literal, and he said something along the lines of, oh yeah, well, I put butter on all of my stuff and everything. And it took me a while to notice, like, wait a minute, because we were having this conversation for about a minute and a half, or maybe even 2 minutes. And I was like, wait a minute. And I realized that he was actually taking everything I was saying literally. So it defeated the purpose. But yeah, they take a lot of things at face value, and it is what it is. So you get this a lot with the ESTPs. Like, things are just obvious to them. They're like, wait, why are y'all trying to make this so deep? That's how SE users usually tend to be. They crash very quickly with their energy. These types tend to be the ones that they're always on the move, especially the ESFPs and the ESTPs. Since they're always on the move, then they tend to not know when they're actually tired. And so in this case, they end up, they just stay on the move all day and doing things, keeping themselves busy, being in the moment, and then finally when they get in bed, crash. Tay falls asleep during every single movie. There's probably only 2 movies that we've ever seen together that he has not fallen asleep for. But he just keeps himself so busy that he doesn't even know when he gets tired. And then as soon as he's sitting down and he's not doing anything, if he's not on his phone or something, or doing something, or if he's not in the center of attention, he'll crash. And that's what tends to happen with a lot of SE users. Obviously not all of them, but I think that's like mainly the case. They're very stylish. They love, since they're like so sensual and everything, then they love like, having like all the latest outfits and these are the guys who just dress like really cool a lot of the times. They have a very keen awareness for aesthetics. And lastly, they're super spontaneous and able to seize the moment and jump into things. Especially the ESFPs and ESTPs, since their NI, which we'll talk about later, is inferior, then they tend to not always think too deeply about what's going to happen in the future because they're so much in the moment. So they're like, oh, why don't we just go and do this right now? And so the quote that I would put for the SE user is, I don't really mind or care much for what's going to happen. I'm much more into what's going on right now and experiencing that completely. Next up are the NE users, or Extroverted Intuition users. The types that use this as their perceiving style are ENFPs, ENTPs as their dominant or their driver or their joy, and INFPs and INTPs is their co-pilot or auxiliary. NE is all about what ifs. So these tend to be the types that get really excited. I think of Dee Dee from Dexter's Laboratory. Ooh, what does this button do? And she's just like always like, ooh, like just happy with ideas. And or I think of Goo from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. Like just keeps on talking about ideas. Even Jefferson Bethke, for those of you who know him, like if you watch his videos, perfect example of NE, like the way that this guy can just talk, like blah, 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 not like as if he's saying anything like meaningless or anything, but it's more of like ideas come to NE users usually really quickly. Well, dominant NE users. For the introverted ones that have it as their auxiliary function, they tend to be they tend to think in the same way, but it's not as quickly. You know, it's not as loud or abrasive. So they're all about what ifs and the possibilities of what could happen in the future. And they like to discuss like very abstract ideas, like what if we could colonize the moon? Oh, what would happen if I decided to lay here in the middle of Barnes and Noble and act as if like I had a heart attack or something? Like, I don't know. Or I wonder what would happen if I threw this bomb into, I don't know. Like, they just always think things like that. Like, what would happen if this happened? Or what if this happened? What if that happened? And not only would they think about that, but then they want to talk about it. And then next thing you know, they just never do it. So then you also think of people like the ENTP, so like Tony Stark or Dexter, who is INTP. They think of things like, I wonder what would happen if there was a spacesuit that I could have created, or blah blah blah. Like, they're the ones that are always like pushing the boundaries, and they have a tendency of sometimes not completing the projects, because once they find out that something is actually possible to make happen, then they're like, oh shoot, well then I don't really know if I want to make this happen anymore. You know, they're just more interested in the idea of making it happen or starting the project, but not necessarily finishing it through. So yeah, they're the idea brainstormer people. And for those of you who may be interested, me and Kylisa, who's ENFP, we did an ENFJ versus ENFP video, and we talk a lot about extroverted intuition in there, and you can see prime example of an ENFP throughout that video. It's an hour long because it's a really deep dive video, but you'll see a lot of our interactions and the difference between NE and add its dominant function, and then, you know, me having NI as an auxiliary function. They also love to play devil's advocate because they like to see the possibilities of everything that could play out. So these types tend to be, especially like ENTPs, I've noticed a lot of ENTPs who they don't even agree with what they're saying themselves, but they will battle you to the death just because they want to debate. They just like to debate, like, oh really, well what if this is that, and it's like, you don't even believe that, you don't know that. And it's like they just want to debate. They just love the idea of seeing things from so many different angles and the possibilities of what could happen. Sometimes that's even part of their NE. They're trying to figure out, I wonder what would happen or how long it would take to get Denzel upset by, you know, challenging this and challenging that and challenging this. And they don't see it as a waste of time. They just see it as having fun. So they tend to be very playful in that manner. They tend to have a very, very, very short attention span. So if you're not usually always going like this, or blah, blah, or if you're talking too long and too deep about a subject, then they're like, oh, start getting bored. I see this a lot with Kylisa. Even in the process of us making our video, she got very antsy a lot of the time, and she just wanted to like keep things very upbeat and everything. And they are very brief. They like brevity. So possibly for those of you even watching right now, they're probably like, they're the types to get the gist of something. They just like to, like, they flip through a book. It's like, okay, yeah, when they get the gist of something, then their minds naturally connect things already. So it's like, cool. But they tend to not realize that other people don't think in that way. So other people will need a more thorough explanation. They will need like more detail behind what is being said and all of that. And they tend to speak in a lot of metaphor as well. They're just really weird a lot of times. Like, they're the loopy comic book nerds a lot of times, and they're just strange. But they're really fun. NE users are really fun, and without them, I feel like we would not have nearly as many of the cool things that we see nowadays. A lot of Disney stuff that we see. Walt Disney was an NE user, and the quote that I would say for them is, "I can come up with numerous possibilities of what may happen, and I would like to explore or theorize about all of them!" Exclamation point. They tend to be excited a lot of the time. They also tend to be prone to contradict themselves. I know that ENFPs, especially if they haven't developed their auxiliary function, which is introverted feeling, then they can mean, what's up, y'all? They can mean exactly what they are saying in the moment. And then the next 2 days or later, or sometimes even like next 2 hours, they completely contradict themselves. Another example of this would be my friend Kendall. If you scroll down enough on my YouTube channel and you look for a video called 7 Minutes with My Friends, you'll see when the visual for Lemonade, Beyonce's Lemonade came out, my friend Kendall, who's an ENFP, I asked him, so how did you feel about Lemonade, etc., etc.? And he was like, oh, yo, it was really dope, man, like, blah, blah, blah. And he was just saying all this stuff, like, Beyonce is a legend, like, she slays, blah, blah, blah. And then I asked him literally about 2-3 minutes later about it, and he was like, you know, it's kind of average, blah, 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 blah. And then at the end of the video, he speaks again about how it was so dope and everything. And I was just like, wow. And the thing is, he really means everything that he's saying. But because his introverted feeling has not been developed, which I said we're going to talk about, that's the judging function, so we're going to talk about in the next videos of the judging function, then it doesn't tend to like ground what he's saying in that moment. And for ENTPs, if their introverted thinking is not logically made sense of what they're saying, then that's when they tend to also like contradict themselves in that sense as well. So next up is introverted sensing. Now this is used dominantly by ISFJs and ISTJs, and then auxiliary or co-pilot ESFJs and ESTJs. And this is all about applying info to what you've seen in the past. They remember the details of certain things, and then they use those details of their past to apply it. So these types are the most prone to like a lot of traditional things and like what's tried and true. They have the mindset of if it's not broke, then don't fix it. If it's already been working, then just continue to let it work in that way. And they're very detail oriented. They're the best with like cataloging and, you know, paperwork and just all of that, like details. Like they're really good at it, especially the ISFJs and the ISTJs. They use the past as a guide for experiences. They tend to have like a lot of like photographic memory, so they'll like they can recall memories that they've had, and it'll make them feel good, especially like with ISFJs. And this happens a lot with INFPs as well, because they have the same function as their third function. But ISFJs have such great memory when it comes to like certain experiences that they've had, and they can recall all of the details about it. I have a friend named Keandra, or Peach, that I often speak about in these videos, and she can recall so many things. Like, it took me a while to, you know, I'm really bad with birthdays and a whole bunch of stuff, but when I first met her, she remembered my middle name, she remembered my birthday, she remembered, even when I met her in person, she remembered like a lot of the things that played out, like details. And it's like, wow, like I just remember the general gist of, you know, how things went and all of that, but she's really good at recalling details and everything. For ISTJs, this tends to come out like more with like ISTJs and ESTJs. This tends to come out more with systems, so they're like they can make like really good like librarians, I guess, where they're looking at the Dewey Decimal System and knowing how to, you know, catalog things properly. They also like to have facts that are concrete, and they also tend to fall into like routine, or they like to have a routine to fall back on, because they just like security and being safe. So these are the SJs, and they often tell a lot of stories in their past. I have an ESFJ teacher who she cannot help but tell a whole bunch of like stories in in order to like relate to right now. And yeah, they're very factual, concrete, details oriented, and they like to have a plan to fall back on. And they use their understanding of how like memories impact others or their past to make good memories for other people. So for their quote, I said they're the types prone to think or say things such as, "This is what happened before, so it will either happen again or I'll create the necessary event to make it happen again." The final perceiving function for today will be Introverted Intuition, also known as NI, and this is used dominantly by INFJs and INTJs, and then auxiliary or co-pilot wise by ENFJs and ENTJs. And this is all about perspective shifting and future pacing, and using a lot of metacognition. So I actually made a video talking about the concept of metacognition if you guys want to go back and look at that, and I get a little bit into NI. But basically these are the types that their whole entire life they've already been a little bit detached from their perspective already, and they watch their mind like form patterns. So as they watch their mind form patterns, then they're able to like, practice this type of like watching themselves from a third person, or being able to view themselves from another person's eyes while it's still them. It's kind of like a weird concept. And from doing that so much and watching their own mind form patterns, they start to realize these patterns in other people, and then they're able to understand how other people's minds work and perspective shift into where they're going. So I also made another video talking about the importance of understanding before trying to be understood. And these types are the ones that naturally will, there was a picture of a 6 or a 9 on the floor, and it said that something like, just because you're wrong doesn't mean that I'm right. Well, it's been clarified that of course like whoever drew it, somebody is wrong there, but it's not about being wrong or right to the NI user. It's more about understanding where the other person is coming from and being able to see their perspective. But it's also important for other people to see the NI user's perspective as well. This is mainly for like the ENFJs and the ENTJs. They're really good at understanding the other person's perspective and then explaining their own perspective. And the INFJs and INTJs are they're consistently understanding the other person's perspective, but they tend to have sometimes a harder time like executing or articulating their own perspective, and it tends to be a little bit too abstract for them because their SE is all the way down at the bottom, and so they're like they tend to speak in like a lot of metaphor. It's a very complicated cognitive function, but I hope that I've explained that to the best of my ability. It's also known for building an internal framework. So these types, or this cognitive function, takes a whole plethora of information and then it synthesizes them into like one complete thought. And so if NE, for example, is all about starting with one idea and then like saying, oh, what if this happened? And what if this happened? What if this happened? Then NI is more of like the inverted triangle, where it's like, okay, you're saying all like, what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? And it's seeing all the connections, connecting all the dots, and then it comes down to one singular idea, and it's like, this is what happened. So they tend to be very good at things like 20 questions, because connecting what I just said about synthesizing all that information and the metacognition that I just spoke of, they're able to see what the other person is thinking about by getting into the other person's mind, by perspective shifting, like, okay, from the information that you're giving me, from what you're saying, I'm guessing that what you are thinking in your mind is bubblegum or this. And I've actually tried this out a lot. I've impressed plenty of my friends, with those new iMessage games. I actually always lose in Connect 4 to Kylisa, because Extroverted Intuition tends to be like really good with like patterns and all of that. So like Connect 4, she's a beast at that. But if Connect 4 is the NE users thing, then the NI users thing is something like 20 questions, like being able to understand the other person's mind and everything. NI users are also like incredibly focused. They like to dig into one topic at a time, as opposed to the NE user who bounces from topic to topic to topic, and they are long-term planners. So they usually always have like a vision, they always have like a goal, and that is what they're going for. The ENTJs and the ENFJs, especially, since they're so much more focused on externalizing and being in the external world, then they are the types to like not necessarily let their NI go like all the way, because their NI and their SC are like right there on top of each other. So they're always battling between sitting down, thinking long term and everything, or just going out to do it. And sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. You can hear more about this in the deep dive with me and David, the ENFJ versus INFJ video. For the INFJs, INFJs and INTJs, they're more concerned with like thinking through everything before they finally start making their move, as opposed to like the ENFJs and the INFJs. They're also long-term planners, but as they're planning, then they're also going along with it, and they just have a confidence of what's going to happen in the future due to that auxiliary NI. And so you can see this a lot with even Zootopia, Judy Hopps. I bring her a lot into this because she seems very focused and goal-oriented, and she just knew what she wanted all along. And even though she didn't know exactly how she was going to get there, she just had this confidence, like, no, but this is what's going to happen. Last thing I would say about the NI users is they tend to have epiphanies even weeks later about things, because it's not like, especially for INFJs and INTJs, they process things so long. Since their SE is at the bottom, then they don't always have, actually they rarely, I would go as far to say they rarely have a accurate view or a realistic view of how the world looks like. So these are the types to like think things such as, if everyone's talking about a box, then they're probably like, there probably is no box. These are like the Illuminati type of people that like they'll just blow your mind, because it's like, wait, what you thought was obvious is actually not. Like, they're seeing something totally different. I think of The Giver. If you guys have ever seen that movie, what is in front of you is not really what it is. Sometimes there's a good to that, sometimes there's a bad to that. As opposed to the ENFJs and the ENTJs, where they have SE right there, so they have a more clear depiction of how the external world is like, and so it doesn't take them as long to synthesize information and get what they're trying to process. Like, everything that's processing, it doesn't take them as long to, like, come to that understanding. But at the same time, they're not always too into the idea of sitting there and letting that intuition load up to 100%, because they always want to get on the go due to that SE. An NI user is most likely or prone to think or say something along the lines of, I'm almost positive that this is going to happen, either inevitably or I'll create the necessary events to make it occur. And the INFJs and INTJs are the ones that are usually most positive that things are going to happen inevitably, because they have such a keen awareness of how patterns and patterns in other people's minds will play out, and how things just tend to go in a natural sense in the external world. Due to their SE, their inferior SE, they're not as inclined to go and actually shift the change in the external world. So they're more of like the ones that will like get into position and let it fall in their lap, because they know how things are going to play out, but they're not necessarily going to make these things happen, as opposed to an ENFJ or ENTJ, where they live in the external world and they're all about seeing results in the external world. They're more likely to say, they will not always know what's going to happen in the future, but they'll more of create that future, because they know this type of things, like, okay, I know that if I do this and if I do that and if I do this and I do that, then this is what's going to happen. So then that, in a sense, kind of like cheats them in knowing the future, because it's like, well, yeah, of course I know the future because I sort of created the future that we are now entering into, or that I am now entering into. Hopefully I explained all of this very well. I tried to make it fast. I'm sorry for all of you, but we got the low attention span people out of the way. At least at the beginning, they probably turned this off by now. But thank you for sitting here listening. And if you guys have any comments, any type of questions, then be sure to leave them. I'm going to be doing the judging functions next, and hopefully after this, a lot of you will have a better idea of what type you are, how these things work, and when I talk about type in future videos, then you can refer back to this and understand it. If you have any questions, like I said, leave comments. If you have anything to add on, leave comments, and I'll be throwing in some, like, a lot of my notes and everything into the comments area in my description of my video. So thanks y'all, done.